Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things.
2, 1, 0, all engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11. Tower clear. Here we go.
Other sightings apparently were taken more seriously.
And one in particular, an incident called the Rendlesham Forest Incident, also known as Britain's Roswell. This was in 1980, shortly after Christmas, when a few American airmen who were stationed in the UK reported seeing a UFO.
A huge, solid, diamond-shaped object they described as 100 foot long, hovering silently in the sky above them.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone. Whatever that means.
American public and global public finally understands UFOs are real. This is a technology that is so far beyond anything that we have.
Reportedly appear to exhibit unusual flight characteristics, appear to demonstrate advanced technology.
ARROW is the culmination of decades of DoD, intelligence community, and congressionally directed efforts to successfully resolve UAP encountered first and foremost by U.S. military.
Welcome back to Disclosure Team with me, your host, Vinny Adams. The following is an interview with Bob McGwier. In this interview, we discuss the current state of the National Defense Authorization Act, the Schumer Amendment, and more. We also touch upon the Soul Foundation, consciousness, and disclosure. If you enjoy this content, please remember to hit that like button, comment, share, and most importantly, subscribe. I hope you enjoy this interview with Bob McGwier. Bob, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Vinny. It's really glad to be back with you, and I'm honored, given especially all of your recent guests. I'm just happy to be here. I follow your podcast and happy to contribute.
Oh, Bob, it's an absolute pleasure. I mean, this is the second time you've been on. I thoroughly enjoyed it the first time, and we've got a lot to dig into today.
I just want to remind everybody, the first place I told about my UFO experiences with the U.S. government was your show. So
it was, yeah. Well, do you want to start off and just give us a little brief recap on what you experienced for anyone that may have not seen the first one?
I was on over two different Navy ships, one in the late 1990s and one in 2008. One in 2008 was a helicopter carrier, which is the flagship, the 7th Fleet, and we went through a typhoon, and I noticed something strange about the weather. We were not getting any rain on us, and I went up and looked through the window in the bridge, and because they had allowed me on the bridge because I was having fun in the middle of a typhoon, and I wasn't seasick, so I was having fun, and I saw something glowing, and my mind wouldn't wrap around it. And all of a sudden the glow got bright and went boo straight up, and the rain came back. So I knew it was a craft that was larger than the ship I was on. And it's the flagship of the 7th Fleet. I mean, it's not small. Everybody remembers this ship if they've watched history of U.S. Navy, because this was the ship where when Gerald Ford sent them to recover people from the Vietnam embassy, this was the one where they pushed the helicopter off the back of the ship and into the sea. So this is a very famous ship. And the other one, I was on a submarine and heard a USO, and it was traveling way too fast to be underwater. Water is incompressible, especially at the depth we were and the speed we were traveling. and it left us like we were nothing. It was just amazing. Anyway,
Wow.
those are my major experiences. I've had others, but those are the big ones.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing again. But listen, we've got lots going on at the moment. It's been in the news today and yesterday with the latest sort of status of the National Defense Authorization Act and kind of the components within. So again, for anyone that may not be too familiar with some of the language that's kind of being discussed at the moment, if you could just give us a brief overview and what's happening.
Sure. So the National Defense Authorization Act says, here's the things we want to authorize the Department of Defense doing and the intelligence community in its support of the Department of Defense and all those intelligence agencies which are funded as departments of the Department of Defense, like National Security Agency, National Reconnaissance Office, Defense Intelligence. All of those are defense agencies. The CIA and the Department of Energy, for example, are very different. The CIA is a member of the executive branch outside of the Department of Defense, and they serve one person. They serve one entity, the President of the United States and his offices. Okay, so but they have places in all sorts of things. So what this thing had in it from the Senate, the UFO Disclosure Act. And it passed the Senate. I mean, it was clear. It had the National Security Council and the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, and therefore a blessing by the President of the United States, Joe Biden, or it wouldn't have been in there. And Schumer wouldn't have brought it up. Schumer did it to honor his mentor, Harry Reid. And Harry Reid, as we know, was also the person that really affirmed for Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. And the thing that swayed the New York Times to publish the article that kind of blew up and started all this, he also did the same thing for David Grush. And David Grush, how do we know that? David Grush said that on Joe Rogan's podcast, which has just now come out. So there's that. So this thing says, everybody that's got UFO stuff, you got to tell the government about it. You got to tell all of your history. You got to give it all back to the government. We gave it out illegally, and we're going to get it all back and let it go in a better way. And all the documentation is hereby declared unclassified after a fixed period of time. But we're going to put together a committee. By the President of the United States will put together a committee in cooperation with the Gang of Eight. So Republicans and Democrats in House and Senate will work with the president to pick a committee. And their job is to say which documents need to remain classified. Because the classification tragedy in the United States is people classify toilet paper if it's their special toilet paper and they don't want anybody else to know about it or have it. I mean, I'm being facetious, but it really is at times just that silly. And we know for a fact, given all this testimony and other things we've seen from Mellon, Elizondo, Grush, and others, that they are classifying basic science. That, my friend, is absolutely illegal. You are not to classify basic science. And what do we know what happens when you classify basic scientists? We have reverse engineering projects. That's a disaster. This is not an engineering project. We need scientists to figure out how the thing works. So what do we need? Basic science to figure out how all this works, so that maybe later on we can engineer it into things that will be good for the people of the United States and its defense and hopefully the world. But what I think we need is to end the truth embargo, because this classification mania for this that was constructed in the Manhattan Project era using Manhattan Project techniques and probably run in the beginning by Oppenheimer on behalf of the government and put together the team that was going to run it. But we don't know that specifically, but that sounds right. And from there through 1952, up into the Dwight Eisenhower administration, up into the 50s, The insanity over the Soviet Union was amazing. We built this massive triad of nuclear deterrent, and it was set in stone that we were going to do that then, when Nikita Khrushchev covered up that they had under 30 missiles, and half the time he tried to fire them, they didn't work. So I'm telling you an example of how secrecy has harmed us. And we just do not need to keep that level of secrecy now, unless there's just something so awful we can't know it. But if it deserves to be classified, keep it classified. But if it's basic statement, they exist. And I'm sure, like we heard from Grush, that they know they have committed federal contracting fraud by handing it out to special interests that they wanted to have it. And Grush told on Rogan that Lockheed Martin has the stuff, and they've been trying to divest themselves of it, and they hate the process because they can't get the right people to work on it because they can't get them cleared. Sure. And the way science works, I promise you, there are very, very few scientists that work in a closet by themselves. Handful of mathematicians I know, a couple. Albert Einstein, the greatest scientist of the 20th century, did not work alone. He had help from Minkowski and David Hilbert and Planck and others. You just don't work alone. And so you can't confer with your colleagues to do peer-reviewed science. Okay, so now we know, given the recent news, that members of the House who are most vulnerable to pressure from the vested interests are opposing the release of this stuff and are opposing the UFO Disclosure Act. And we know that Mike Rogers, former big guy in armed services and House intelligence from Alabama, and the current head of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Turner from Ohio, and now they've convinced the Speaker of the House, he's a Christo-fascist, kind of hyper religious guy who says, I get up in the morning and read the Bible to tell me what to do when I go to be Speaker of the House. And so, I mean, it's a direct violation of the Constitution. And what's the scary part to me right now is a lot of people in the United States would rather have that and do away with the Constitution. So so they are opposed to the UAP disclosure document. And Turner, he represents the Wright-Patterson Air Force District and a bunch of other contractors that are around there. And Mike Rogers and he were the number one money takers from all the big defense contractors when Rogers was in the House, and Turner now. And you can hear it. We're going to yank money from your district, and we're going to let everybody there know it was your fault if you vote for this or let it through. And the House Permanent Select Committee, they are a gatekeeper. One person is a gatekeeper on this bill because they passed a bill in the House that looks nothing like the one that was passed in the Senate. So they have to go to conference and agree on what the thing will actually be. And they put a watered down, easy to escape, all sorts of loopholes, lets everybody get away with stuff. And it looks to me like they have a very good chance of killing the UAP Disclosure Act. Let's hope they don't. I hope that me talking and Grush talking and you talking and Matt talking and Matt talking to Grush and Matt talking to everybody else and all these podcasters that talk to the public about what's going on can have an influence on whether or not, because I guarantee you they listen to people that call their offices, write their offices, and tell them they are going to vote against them and support their opponent, whether it's in the primary or the general election, if they don't vote for this act. We need activism right now, or it's not going to pass.
Yeah, absolutely. I noticed there's been some really big pushes today since this was announced that sort of some of the major activist groups have been really sort of contacting their reps hard. It's really good to see. I mean, let's look at the worst case scenario, and this does get stripped out of the NDAA. Are there any alternate routes that we can look sort of towards for 2024, or is it a case of waiting for next year again for
waiting? But the facts are, we already know that 40 people have used the law as it now exists from NDA 2023. So they're coming forward and they're telling stories. And if you believe the Senate is not going to call in people to testify, and that will rattle cages, because I can tell you, people are not going to believe who comes in and testifies. They're just not going to. And I'm going to tell you who. I'm just going to tell you, because since everybody seems to know and everybody's talking about it, my number one person that I would love to come in and testify in front of Warner and what's his name in Florida's committee, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence. I'll tell you who I want to testify: Barack Obama.
Wow. Yeah.
And he knows.
That would be amazing. It would. It really would.
I mean, if you don't think he knew, go listen to Joe Rogan's podcast. And I can tell you this: people need to understand the danger Grush put himself in by coming out into the public. And I don't mean just from people that want to stomp on him and hurt him and his wife and family. No, I mean end his freedom. Because if he lied in front of Congress, they will pursue him to the ends of the earth to have him convicted of perjury and violation of the national security laws, etc. And he has been hyper careful. So those things he said in public, I believe every word that's been said is what he believes to be true. Not only that, he brought in a stack of receipts that deep to the Inspector General's office to prove his case.
Yeah, and I think this is what some people, I think I've noticed online, have been struggling with, that they feel like Grush isn't really saying much. But I mean, for people in the UFO community, I think it's pretty clear he's saying a lot. I mean, why do you think the public in general are struggling to grasp?
They want him to be a leaker and not a whistleblower. The only protection he has is NDA 2023, which allows him to go tell this stuff and everything he found. He was obligated. He was forced to by the law to go tell the inspectors general of contract of acquisition regulations violations. They violated FAR with what they've been doing with these reverse engineering projects forever, and he is obligated to report what he has found. Everyone who has not reported what they know is now committed a crime. All of them. They're going to have blanket forgiveness for all sorts of stuff. But what we know is 40-something people, some of them huge names, have come in and talked to the Inspector General for the intelligence community.
That's amazing. I mean, do you think that any of them will come forward publicly? Maybe.
I doubt it. I doubt it. And the reason I say that is, sorry for interrupting, but I want to understand. They don't want to be subjected to the trash that Grush has been. He was their ideal person to come forward. So they would have to go through DOPSR approval, the Defense Office for Public Statement Release approval, to get permission to testify in public or give public information. So they would be willing to go into a secure information facility and give testimony under oath in front of these committees that have relevant overview and oversight over these agencies. But they are never going to come out in public until things become unclassified or they are ordered to by others.
Do you think you mentioned the select committee earlier, set from the Senate? Do you think we may see hearings put on by the select committee or even the Armed Services Committee?
I do not believe there will be public hearings, but there may be. I am certain. Here's what I do know. I know from having been told by multiple people that I trust that all these people, including Grush, have already testified to the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and the Senate Armed Services Committee, and that everybody on Armed Services and everybody on the Senate Committee knows the truth about these programs. And they didn't have any trouble selling to their colleagues because that UAP Disclosure Act passed overwhelmingly in the Senate. But in the House, it's more restricted. There are 435 members, and a handful are on the Select Committee on Intelligence, and a handful are on the Armed Services Committee, and a handful are on the Oversight Committee. And they have to care about separation of powers as put forth by the United States Constitution and our founders. If they do not exert their privilege to do oversight, they are giving the executive branch and one agency of it control over what it is they're supposed to be managing. And we'll give you one thing, because Grush made this point really well. I want to emphasize it. Suppose China and Russia have a reverse engineering program, and they know things that could help us, say, save our country from an invasion. And if the president of the United States is not briefed, how can he go talk to them about what is going on? Because he doesn't know what's going on. It is his constitutional job to conduct the foreign policy of the United States. You can't hamstring them and cut them off at the knees and expect them to be able to do their job credibly. It is time. I'm going to sound like Steve Bassett. It's time for the truth embargo to end.
It is. Absolutely. And how does Carl Nell's kind of confirmation of Grush's testimony impacts the credibility of the Schumer Act? And did Nell have any role in kind of drafting some of that language?
I believe that Nell, this is my belief. I don't have enough evidence to say it is incontrovertibly true, but I believe the following. He was the or a principal author of the UAP Disclosure Act. Now, I'm sure that Danny Sheehan and a bunch of other people will call it, and the way those things are done, they're passed all over the place. So everybody who's impacted can chop off on it and approve it. But it appears to me that right now, the Intelligence Committee in the House and opposition from the Central Intelligence Agency most certainly, and probably maybe others, but CIA most certainly is in the way.
Carl Nell, he was recently at the Sol Foundation, the inaugural kind of conference, let's say, that they put on. And he presented this roadmap going up into sort of 2030 and onwards about this kind of disclosure process. And then we hear, if that wasn't to happen, maybe we'd get this what's called catastrophic disclosure, where everything is just dumped out by an adversary or even non-human intelligence themselves, which will cause some kind of societal disruption. Do you kind of subscribe to that?
I subscribe that Nell has been the principal advisor, if not the principal author, of the big way to go forward. Okay. And that what he presented at Sol, given that it was leaked and wasn't supposed to be leaked, but now we know it, so we might as well discuss it. What he is telling the people in power, a way to go forward that will not be destructive. And what this means to me is the first thing that would happen is they're here. The second thing that happens is here's what we're doing about it. The third thing that would happen would the third thing, but here's what I believe is true. If someone says, like the president, they're here, the media will come in and they won't follow the disclosure path. They're going to come in and talk about experiencers, abductions, murders, everything. They really have a choice because it's too late. I mean, they've already admitted these UFOs are real. And Kirkpatrick, as non-transparent as he was, he told everybody and their brother about these fears. And there are amazing pieces of video on the web that people can see where complete context of the video is clear. And these spheres are all over the place. There's one that was from San Diego that's 12 minutes long. And the thing is unreal. And Ross Coulthart has held one of these spheres in his hands. I mean, it's just, this cannot be kept a secret. What they're trying to do is stop the harm they see that would come to agencies and corporations, which are important to the security of the nation. And what they're doing is building up resentment that will blow up and blow up big if we get uncontrolled disclosure. They need to have the UAP Disclosure Act because it set in place the Kennedy process.
Yeah.
The investigation for how Kennedy's assassination happened, which was a travesty and a joke because it was told a bunch of lies and was run by Dulles of all people. Okay, so but the process is probably good for this, and it allows them to stagger release of the truth over decades.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good way of balancing kind of transparency, but also taking into consideration national security concerns. It can be done.
If they just don't have it this deep, dark, multi-layer, suppressed, carved up, unacknowledged special access program where no one is informed and allowed oversight, they can bring in cleared, real scientists. I was a Ph.D. in applied mathematics that worked in all sorts of things and published a ton of papers, but I had access because I was cleared. And I was proud and happy to work on technological things I felt the United States needed and I was prepared to work on. So in other words, people like me, I might not be the best person to go, but I'm telling you, people like me in physics and biology and sociology and religion and mathematics, chemistry and so forth, they could go and decide whether they would undergo the process of getting a security clearance to work on the parts that can't be made public. But the actual basic science, it is illegal to make it classified. Understanding the fundamentals of physics is not something that should be classified. And I believe with all my heart that there's enough evidence out there that they have covered up basic understandings of physics.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I mentioned there about Carl Nell at the Seoul conference, and unfortunately I wasn't able to attend, if I'm right in saying you weren't either. But did you speak to anybody? Are there any noteworthy insights that you may have from the conference, or anyone that you've spoken to that went, anything of interest?
Yeah. Well, I believe that people that are regularly known to ufology, like UFO Joe and Matt and other people went, they're doing a really good job of reporting. And all of them have done exactly what Nolan wanted and kept the things contained so there could be controlled publication of what happened at the Seoul conference. Now, a lot of people were upset, and some of them have acted very ugly. I won't name them, but that there was no real physics there. This was high level philosophy, public policy, etc., with some details about disclosure. And again, it was a public policy, philosophy, etc. forum. Physics was not discussed. There was no physics of UFOs discussed there except in private session, one-on-one. Lots of people came up to Puthoff and talk to him about Lakatsky. And multiple people report that Hal Puthoff said, if Lakatsky said it, you can bank on it because he knows more than anybody I know, including himself. Yeah.
Yeah. It's good to hear.
And the interview that Corbell and Knapp had with Lakatsky, that last one they did, it is amazing. And Lakatsky was allowed, by going through the same process Grushwith, to tell the world, or he would go to jail, that we have a craft and we have been inside it. I guarantee you that's part of the planned disclosure. And Lakatsky is not a guy who would do that without having prior approval from the Defense Intelligence Agency and the Department of Defense to release that information, because he is a stickler for protocol.
He is. Yeah, because he was asked about, testifying in front of Congress, and he seemed quite hesitant. But I think surely he'd be one of the best people to get in front of these committees, wouldn't he?
That and Oak Shannon wrote notes from NIDS, right? And every single person that is still alive that's on Oak Shannon's note should be subpoenaed to testify in front of Congress in closed session if they want.
And that was to do with the working group run by John Alexander, if I'm correct. Yeah.
And John Alexander, who has denied any UFO stuff for decades, went to the Veil Conference and admitted he ran the UFO thing many years ago for the Pentagon. He admitted he ran it. And how many people have said, "Oh, we know about John. He's been around forever. He was around when I had a Millabs," or something like that. I mean, it's just amazing that after all this lying to people, he's now come out and openly said he ran the program.
I mean, that's crazy, isn't it? That's amazing. So do you think the actual process in itself is actually intentionally slowing down at the moment?
Yeah, but it has nothing to do with the NDAA and the UAP Disclosure Act.
Right.
The United States is in or on the verge of being in 3 major wars, and people are not paying enough attention to what's going on in the world. So I want people to see the European continent from my eyes. After we had a president that hated our defense of Europe through NATO, for whatever reason, he was clearly against it. The president of the United States now, as soon as Russia invades multiple ways into Ukraine, goes to Europe and totally turns them around. He's made the strongest NATO there has been since the Soviet blockade of Berlin. NATO has never been stronger or more unified than it is right now. And we have the European Commission actually deciding right this minute whether or not to send 100% of their munitions developed to Ukraine over the next year. That's because, let me tell you, my read of it, I'm not on the inside and haven't been on the inside for over 2 years, but my read of it is as follows. The Europeans were convinced by release of classified intelligence that Ukraine was first and they were all next.
Wow.
And so I've never seen anything like them agree to ramp up their defense spending, their defense. Germany put its foreign troops, tanks, missiles, etc., on a foreign soil for the first time since World War II. They have them on the border with Belarus inside of Poland. They have them up defending the Baltic states from Russia. I mean, I just can't believe this stuff is happening. And the American people, I don't know whether the Europeans are hearing about it or not, but the American people don't realize we have sent a huge number of troops and materials to the NATO countries because we are preparing for all-out war against Russia. And we've done the same thing with Israel, and we're doing it with all those islands around China right now. And we've sold $400 billion worth of submarines to Australia because they are determined that if China acts badly, the Malacca and other straits will be closed so that China will starve in 30 days. Yeah. I mean, we just have these choke points, and we are going to do the right thing militarily. But I'm going to tell you, if we go to war against China, it is going to be ugly. I don't think there'll be much left of Taiwan, but, it's just the case is the places they want to control are international waters. The places that they want to contest above the water is international airspace. They cannot be allowed to get away with this, or the world order, which allowed everybody to trade freely all over the world, that the United States implemented at the end of World War II, will end. And all the benefits we got from it will be over. So I just think the United States is preparing for a 3-front war. That's what I think they're doing.
No, I mean, that's pretty clear. It's obviously some really troublesome times at the moment. And, the things that you mentioned, we've got, presidential elections next year. I mean, this could all put the kind of UAP subject on the back burner for a while. Do you think that will damage it in some way, or will they be able to just sort of pick up where they left off? Let's say
the intelligence community, the armed services community are not going to stop working. Good. So they're going to continue this, and Arrow is up and running. We need to get the right person to be the new leader, one that's more forward-facing and transparent. That's my opinion. And I think Kirkpatrick did a fine job of doing what he was told to do. And I say that because Gillibrand openly espoused that she was extremely sad to see him leave. And she knows all the truth. I guarantee you. She's on both intelligence and armed services. So she knows the facts, and she was unhappy to see him go. But he told people when he came in, this was his sunshine tour, that he had another job and he's off to East Tennessee to go to work soon.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people were unhappy with anything that came from Arrow. This is the thing. I think nothing really became public from Arrow, really. We had a couple of little reports and a website that sort of came about in a bit of a hurry. But should we expect more from them going forward with this? You want transparency from the new director, but should we expect more from them as well? Actual public-facing work? It's
not. The Department of Defense is not a truly public-facing group. They don't publish policy. They don't talk about policy. Their job is to execute their mission and to collect the intelligence they need to do their mission. I do not expect a national intelligence and combined Department of Defense entity to be very transparent. It's going to have to come from others. And that's the reason this Truth Commission working for the president was the right place for this to happen. And it scared everybody inside that wants to keep the secret. And they're really working hard to push back.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the distrust came quite early on after David Grush came out, and Kirkpatrick put out that statement on his on his LinkedIn page, and it almost seemed like Grush was saying he'd approached Arrow. Kirkpatrick was sort of saying that he hadn't, and we didn't know who to believe. And there just seems to be a bit of a muddy water around that issue. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Because that really, there was something wrong with that, I think.
Kirkpatrick's testimony in public has not been under oath. Grush's testimony in public has been under oath.
That's a fair.
Those are the two facts I know. That's fair. What I personally know.
Yeah, no,
and and he testified in front of Congress that he had been to and talked to people in Arrow, including Kirkpatrick. That was under oath.
Yeah.
And so to me, the only interpretation is that Kirkpatrick was instructed to obfuscate. And here, let me give you the perfect example of a Kirkpatrick obfuscation. We in Arrow have seen no evidence at all that this subject is about extraterrestrials. Well, if that's not about extraterrestrials, what else have you ruled out? Is it interdimensional? Is it angels? What is it? And had they been on their toes, they would have asked the tougher questions, unless the questions were rehearsed with the committee ahead of time. And you just can't know that.
No, that's true. Very true. So, Bob, let's shift things a little bit more, because I know that you've been doing a lot of kind of focusing on the kind of consciousness side of the subject, which is something that I've not really dipped my toes into that much. So I just wondered if you can kind of elaborate on any specific examples from your own personal work that suggests this convergence of consciousness and physics, is imminent almost.
It's getting there. I'm not going to say it's imminent, because I see a path, but I don't see the end of the tunnel. Okay.
Right.
So there are published papers a scientist like me would read if I was going to work on this subject. And they include all of the things that have been published in and around Stargate, Monroe, Ed May, those people. That's one collection of stuff you'd read. The other stuff you would read is everything that's been published by cognitive scientists and others, neurologists, neuroscientists, etc., that are dealing with the implementation of consciousness by the human soul and or brain. Okay. And I became a follower of and believer in Donald Hoffman several years ago, when he published what was just the most brilliant paper I've seen in this subject in a long time. And it is a proof of a mathematical theorem, which, operating under the assumptions that the game theory of cognitive evolution, the game theory of evolution is how the universe manages evolution. And it's basically pretty straightforward, is that evolution has an objective function. You improve it or you don't. And if you improve it, you survive better. I mean, basically, it's that simple. But assuming that, he proved the following theorem. And it's really amazing, Eddie. If a living being of any type has evolution to govern its forward trajectory, if it perceives actual reality, it is disadvantaged over any living being that's perception of reality is colored in a way that maximizes its ability to survive. And in other words, if you see reality, you're selected against. If you maximize what you interpret reality to be, that maximizes your chances of survival, you're selected for. And this means, Vinny, our senses produce an illusion, and we live based on the illusion our senses and our consciousness interprets for us. So whatever perceptual system is, doesn't matter whether it's in the brain or not, that theorem says we do not perceive reality. We perceive an illusion that allows us to get along and survive. Wow. And Donald Hoffman proved that, and I went through it in detail, looking for a loophole. And I went, oh my goodness, he's right. Wow. Okay, so then I was very disappointed when he kind of disappeared for a year. And he suddenly came out of disappearing for a year, but he had kept very quiet and very private as he almost died from COVID. Wow. He went into the hospital, and he was one of those that went in and they were going, okay, he'll be dead in a week. And he survived anyway. And then he came out with this new paper called Fusion of Consciousness. And he is a person who has taken whatever the information bits or configuration bits are for conscious experience and the experience itself. And that consciousness and the consciousness experience is called a conscious agent. So he's built this whole huge collection of conscious agents. And from it, he has proven a bunch of theorems, including we can get the following pieces of physics that look like they arrive from consciousness. And he is all built on this little bit of success. He's put together the following scenario. There's this massive, huge space of conscious events and their dynamics. So the events and the dynamics. One event leads to another event, so that's the dynamics, which he calls conscious agents, are collected in this space. And the set of all subsets of this set of conscious events is called the universal consciousness. And what we are in physics and what we perceive is a projection of the one mind down to us. There's a source and we're the sink. And he's interpreted and proven theorems which show that given that this is a small tube to our tiny little brains, that you lose information from the big whole thing coming down to us. And this loss of information, it turns into time. So time is based on the loss of information from the projection of the universal consciousness down to us. That's number one. And then he showed, because the physicists told him if they were going to take him seriously, he had to show something. He showed that the new way of looking at certain things called the amplitude hedron, which is a piece that is needed to have non-space-time-like object to talk about the things that go on in physics. He found the amplitude hedron and showed them how to do it. So what's going on now is Hoffman and his others working with physicists are trying to determine how to take these conscious agents and project them through a projection down to get space-time and all of physics. Now, why is he doing this? Why does he think he even should? Because if you go listen to theoretical physicists, they will tell you two things that they love most are dead. What are these two things they love most that are dead? What's quantum field theory and general relativity? They don't work at the boundaries of all these things where they need to work.
Mm.
And a lot of people don't understand that space-time, if we believe it, it means certain things. It means if I'm halfway across the universe and I'm moving at a different speed from you, I can't tell the difference. I can see an event you experienced before you experience it.
Sure.
And so what does that mean, Benny? That means all of the future is already decided. And I don't know whether I believe that. So space-time says these things, which they already know don't work at a black hole. They already know they don't work at the tiny things. They already are seeing problems with it out at the edge of the known universe, especially now the James Webb Telescope is here. So they already know that space-time as a construct is dead because it does not describe reality. And quantum field theory can't seem to be integrated with general relativity in any meaningful way. And there's all these missing pieces. What are the missing pieces? Well, 95% of the stuff of the universe can't be put into quantum field theory. You cannot figure out what constitutes dark energy and dark matter right now from quantum field theory. So they already know the standard model is dead.
Yeah.
So general relativity and the standard model of dead. This means there's room for Hoffman's thing to be taken seriously, especially since he's now getting some success. Okay, so there's that. And then I have all these personal experiences, Vinny. My personal experiences, just let me go over the ones that are most impactful.
Sure.
When I was born in Tennessee, before I was 1 year old, I got very ill. And I had 3 cardiac arrests that lasted seconds to minutes. And so I had 3 NDEs. And my parents were told that I would not survive, or if I survived, I would be a vegetable because that was a cerebral infection. I recovered in 2 weeks. So then I went to live in Alabama, where my father and his parents ran a furniture manufacturing plant. And when I was 3, I woke up one day, walked into where my mother and her friend was, and I grabbed books off the shelf and showed them I could read. No one had taught me how to read.
Wow.
So by the time I was 10, I was doing really all sorts of things. And the thing that stood out most to my family, because it meant the most to them, is I memorized Gray's Anatomy from cover to cover. So they assumed from the time I was 10 till I graduated from high school that I was going to go to medical school and be a doctor. But while I was 10, I did astronomy and built a telescope. I did amateur radio and built a radio. I was just not easily tamed. So from 10 years old on, my life has essentially been that of a polymath.
Right.
Which people can go look at this and figure out what it is. And so when I went to college, one weekend, I went to college with my girlfriend from my hometown. One weekend, I picked her up to bring her home, and she and I experienced 1.5 hours of missing time and wound up in the middle of nowhere. 2 weeks later, I was not going to be a doctor. I was not going to go to school there. I moved across state, went to an engineering university, and got a degree in mathematics and engineering. And then I proceeded to do mathematics and engineering all the way through college. I got out for a while and worked at Sandia National Laboratories, then went back to college and got a Ph.D. in applied mathematics. And I've been doing that stuff ever since, but I've no one's ever been able to tame what my interests were. So I've been a polymath my whole life. And it showed in the work I did for the government for 27 years. And it showed in the work I did as a professor at Virginia Tech, where I became chief scientist of the most successful research entity at Virginia Tech. So just my life and then I went to see Chris Bledsoe.
Yes.
And my Chris Bledsoe experiences were life-changing. I saw the orbs, I had the experiences, and they followed me home. And I had orbs and craft at home and orbs in my home, orbs right outside my window. They were different from Chris's, but they were still there. So then I had an experience where I had a reading of my mother after she passed by somebody. And Everything that was told me was true. I didn't know some of it at the time, but I later found out proof that it was true by talking to my brothers about it. And so all this says life survives death. And since the physical body is not involved in the consciousness that was talking through this person to me, consciousness cannot reside in the brain. And then I went off and looked at other things like the application of one of the most fundamental, foundational pieces of mathematics and logic ever conceived by the human brain. And that is Kurt Gödel's incompleteness theorem, provided the proof to my satisfaction. It still needs to be written down formally that consciousness cannot reside on a machine. And our brain is a quantum machine. So it can be the antenna and the interpreter and the physical interface for our consciousness. But in my opinion, I've seen enough to believe it cannot be the seat of consciousness. So that's what's led me here. And so I'm doing this stuff. So now recently, there have been these papers I've read that have allowed me to put together that thermodynamic entropy and information entropy and quantum information entropy are all these kind of entropies. And then Ed May demonstrated by a really awesome experiment that if whatever our target was had high thermodynamic entropy, it was easier for the remote viewer to see it. This means there's a remote, non-local connection between physics and consciousness. So these things just keep piling up. And I'm just pursuing it. And I found a book called The Orb Project. And the preface was written by this scientist who was pounded into the dirt by his peers, where he wrote down the first steps of marrying entropy and information entropy with physics. And it's not complete, but it's the first steps. So I'm just pursuing that until I or someone else does it.
That's absolutely fascinating. And I always, coming from this kind of nuts and bolts research background, always struggled with making that connection between consciousness and the woo. And I love calling it the woo. And I do like it, but I've always struggled to kind of marry them together. But for anybody out there that is struggling with that thing, how would you recommend they start to kind of piece that puzzle together? Is there any researchers or?
I think, well, the researchers are named, but there's a bunch of ongoing stuff. But if they just want to convince themselves that it's worth pursuing, go read about the work the CIA and Monroe and Ed May and Hal Puthoff and Russell Targ did. Because irrespective of what was told, those things were not shut down. When I was in the intelligence community, I could tell you where at least a large group of remote viewers sat.
Wow. And this is following on from the work.
Yeah, after they claimed it was over.
And all that.
After they claimed it was over.
Wow.
And people want further stuff, go look at the work that's been done and what's been released by the CIA and FOIA about the consciousness things they found, the remote viewing things they found in Stargate and elsewhere. And they're released to the public now on their FOI website. And just go start there and then start with maybe one more thing. Read the story of Jimmy Carter going to a remote viewer to find a downed aircraft that went down someplace in Africa and had no information. And the remote viewer told them a latitude and longitude. They found it within 100 meters of there, completely hidden from the sky in the canopy of the trees. I mean, you just give them these things and you learn these things and you go, we do not understand. And we know we don't understand 95% of what we perceive as reality because of dark energy, dark matter. We get these instances where our government still uses and has relied on remote viewing to find out things. And go read anything you want on Joe McMoneagle and his telling people what was inside this large factory in the Soviet Union, and where he drew pictures of them that is near perfection. And we know they're near perfection because after the wall fell and we went in to look in there, we saw what Joe drew, which had never been outside.
Wow.
These things are just too much evidence that there's something to it.
Yeah. I mean, you've pointed us in some directions there, and we've also talked about the NDAA and the kind of government side of disclosure, and which is something I have been focusing on a lot. But what else within this kind of UFO subject umbrella? What else should people, do you think, be sort of looking into or researching or focusing on, rather than just sort of sitting back and waiting for it to be sort of handed to us?
I totally agree. So many people can do what I've done that give me evidence that I can locally believe in. It's not going to convince any high-level scientist, but it's more than enough to convince me something's happening.
Yeah.
And so I went out and bought a $40 security camera, and I put 3 of them around my house. And I get these flashes in the sky. And when my girlfriend and I look at these flashes, we isolate the frame in the video these flashes are in, zoom in, and it's a structured craft.
Wow.
And this evidence people can see on my or my girlfriend's Facebook page on a public and open photo book. So I'm going to increase the capabilities of my acquisition equipment, and I'm working on something for a major project. So I'm building a passive radar. And what does a passive radar mean? It sounds complicated, but it's doable now by ordinary human beings. And that is, you take a television and radio signal from somewhere near you, which is massive power, and it's always there. And you can take a copy of that signal and look for it in the sky. So if an object is up there and it's radio reflective, it sends a piece of that energy down to your receiver. So you have a copy and another copy from a different direction. You can do mathematics on all those pieces and get a direction and a velocity. And then if you get a direction, a distance, direction, and velocity going this way, you can look at what you're seeing in the camera and the Doppler shift on the thing that's coming to you and see this velocity. So you get this velocity and this velocity. Now you have its entire motion vector.
Yeah.
So, and this is $600. And you plug it into a Raspberry Pi.
Wow.
Okay, so I'm just going to put all this out and tell everybody how to do it. And so I want to do this in some specific, spectacular places. I'm not going to name them, but you can guess them. And they have initially said they're interested. So if I do it, people will be able to see it being done right in front of their faces. I'm just trying to convince people.
Yeah.
And then so there's UFO DAP and there's sky360.org. Both of those are building collection systems where ordinary people can get a couple of cameras, glue them together with an inexpensive artificial intelligence computer, and collect live data. And I just think people need to say, what can I do that helps me? Well, these inexpensive security cameras that are wireless and get stuff to your phone so you can get alerts. We look at these alerts and we see, oh, there's another flash. Let's look, and it's a craft every time. Every time. Wow. I have hundreds of them now. Now, nobody knows. I'm not going to convince any scientist or skeptic, but it's enough to convince me because I know why we got it. And then occasionally we go out with color cameras, no flash, no nothing, and we get weird things.
Yeah.
And that evidence is also available.
No, I think it's really good. And this is like what you said, going out and doing something for yourself, I think is really important.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
This is one area where the paranormal community has it all over us because everybody and their brother wants to go to a haunted house. Well, people should go out in their backyard and look at the sky.
Yeah, I'd rather do that than go to a haunted house. That's
exactly.
For sure.
Exactly.
Well, Bob, I've covered everything that I had written down. Before I let you go, is there anything that you felt like you wanted to talk about that we haven't touched upon, or are you happy with that?
I'm reasonably happy. I just want people to, if you're in the United States, contact your congressperson in the House of Representatives, because the Senate's already passed it, and demand that they vote for the UFO Disclosure Act and have it included in the National Defense Authorization Act. And the reason they put stuff in the NDAA is because nobody in the House or Senate will vote against it, except a handful of people, because it's too important. It is really one of the most important bills we pass every year. And so just help us help you. People like me, Vinny, others, we want this to come out and we want to help you, but you have to help us help you. You can't sit on your couch and watch TV or look at your computer at YouTube videos and get stuff done. You gotta get up and do something. And if you want to get up and do something, now's the time.
Absolutely. Well, Bob, it's been a pleasure as always. I really appreciate you coming on and breaking it all down for us.
It was a pleasure, Vinny. I enjoy being on here, and you have a great podcast, and I really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Bob. And to everyone watching, thank you for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Take care. Goodbye.